A 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair stands in front of her classmates, smile wide, drawing clutched in both hands, and tells them her father is her hero. Her teacher tells her to stop lying. The drawing ends up in the mud, and every single child watches it happen. What Rachel Monroe didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she just called a fantasy had spent 11 years doing things the government still won't put in writing. And that morning, he was already in the parking lot. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who simply couldn't imagine your truth, stay with us. Subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The bus pulled into Silver Pine Nature Reserve at 9:30, and the morning smelled like pine resin and cold water. October had arrived early in Washington, and the trees along the trailhead were already turning amber and rust bleeding through the canopy, leaves spinning down without sound. Emma Calloway stayed near the back of the group as the class filed off the bus. Not because she was slow, because she was careful. She'd learned, over years of navigating sidewalks and door frames, and the gap between the bus step and the curb that most people left too narrow, that the world was designed for people who didn't have to think about it. She did fine, she just had to think. You need help? That was Jalen, her usual desk neighbor. He was already holding his own project board, a trifold about his grandmother, who'd volunteered as a nurse during Desert Storm. I'm good, Emma said, steering her chair down the access ramp at the bus's rear. Her project board lay flat across her lap, secured under a binder clip and covered with a sheet of wax paper so the moisture wouldn't bleed the marker colors before she could show it. She'd worked on it for 7 days. Not continuously, she had homework and physical therapy on Wednesdays, and her dad made her go to bed at 9:30 even on weekends, which she'd been arguing about since 3rd grade and had not yet won. But whenever she had a spare hour, she'd been at the kitchen table with her colored pencils and her index cards, checking her facts against what her dad had told her, filling in the parts she could talk about freely, and leaving deliberate gaps around the parts she couldn't. Her father had read it over once at her request. He'd made one correction a date, and then folded it back up and handed it to her without a word. Just put his hand briefly on the top of her head and walked back to the kitchen to finish washing dishes. She'd considered that a very good review. Rachel Monroe had been teaching 5th grade for 2 years, which was long enough to have opinions and short enough that most of those opinions hadn't been tested yet. She was 26, passionate about what she called intellectual honesty in her students, and genuinely good at lesson design. She had a master's degree in education from a well-regarded university. She cared about her kids. She just didn't always know what she didn't know. She'd designed the My Real Life Hero presentations as a counterweight to superhero culture. She wanted kids to think about real people who'd shaped their lives and to defend their choices with evidence. A good assignment, structured, purposeful. She'd reviewed every submission for content and spelling. She hadn't thought to flag Emma's in advance, because Emma had always been reliable. The class arranged themselves around the cluster of picnic tables near the shelter at the clearing's edge. The reserve was quiet. At this hour, a woodpecker somewhere in the high timber, the distant sound of the creek below the ridge. A park coordinator named Doug had given them a brief welcome and then stepped back to let the class do their thing. Rachel stood at the side. Emma went third. She rolled forward into the open space between the tables, positioned herself so everyone could see the board, and peeled back the wax paper. The drawing wasn't professional. She was 10, and she used colored pencils, and the proportions were slightly off. Her father's arms were a little too long, his neck a little too short, but she'd gotten his expression right. The careful, steady look he carried most of the time, like he was always listening to something a few seconds ahead of the present moment. Beside him, she'd drawn Atlas. The Belgian Malinois was rendered in amber and brown, ears forward, body alert. She'd given him a working dog vest, because that's what he wore when he was on deployment. Though at home he mostly wore nothing except the red bandana her dad tied around his neck on weekends because he thought it was funny, and Atlas seemed to have made his peace with it. "This is my dad," Emma began. "His name is Luke Calloway, and this is Atlas. Atlas is a Belgian Malinois that's a kind of military working dog. My dad's a Navy SEAL, and Atlas was his K9 partner for 8 years. Together, they did search and rescue operations. Some of them were classified, so I can't tell you everything. But some I can. She'd rehearsed this. Her voice was steady. My dad is my hero for 2 reasons. The first is what he does. He spent his career making sure people who were lost or in danger got found, in places where it wasn't safe, in conditions where most people would quit. He never quit. She paused. The second reason is what he does at home. But I'll get to that. She looked up. Most of her classmates were paying attention. Jalen had his chin in his hand. A girl named Sophia was watching Atlas's picture with round eyes. Rachel Monroe's face had shifted. Emma registered it, but kept going. Atlas is trained for tracking, area search, and building clearance. That means he can follow a scent trail through flood conditions, across moving water, over terrain that's too difficult for humans to search quickly. When my dad was deployed, Atlas would run point on search patterns while my dad handled the tactical coordination. They've worked in desert conditions, mountain terrain, and coastal flooding zones. She moved to a section of the board where she'd printed small maps, not real operational maps, obvious, just reference maps she'd pulled from publicly available news coverage from a search operation 3 years ago, that her dad had mentioned once, carefully in the context of what Atlas was capable of. This is from a flooding rescue near a wilderness area in Washington state, she said. My dad's unit helped locate several civilians trapped in elevated terrain after a river overflowed. Atlas found 2 of them, a man and his daughter, in a section that the primary search teams had already cleared twice, because of Atlas's nose, not his eyes. She was almost done. She took a breath, and Rachel spoke. Emma. The voice came at the wrong moment. Not loud, just firm enough to stop everything. I want to ask you something. Emma looked up. Do you have any documentation for what you're describing? A beat. The woodpecker had stopped. My dad told me most of it, Emma said. Some of it I found in news reports. The classified parts I left out. Right. Rachel folded her arms. Her tone was careful. The kind of careful that had a hard edge underneath. The thing is, Emma, what you're describing is quite specific and quite extraordinary. A Navy SEAL father, a military working dog partner, classified operations. She paused. How do we know this is real? Emma felt the shift in the clearing. 22 pairs of eyes. Because my dad told me. Parents sometimes tell their children stories that make them feel special, Rachel said. That's human. That's understandable. But this is a presentation of fact. And what you're describing, Emma, a Navy SEAL who also does search and rescue with a trained K9, as a single father. That's a lot. He is a single father. I'm sure he's wonderful. But I wonder if some of this has been embellished over time. Or maybe he told you stories that were meant to be. I didn't make it up. I'm not saying you made it up. Rachel's voice shifted, the soft, particular cruelty of someone who believes they're being compassionate. I'm saying sometimes stories grow. And in a presentation context, we need to be responsible with the truth. Emma's hands had moved to her wheel rims. She wasn't rolling forward or backward, just holding. My dad is who he is, she said. I know what he's done. Emma. Rachel took a step toward her. You don't need to defend a story. If your dad is a great father, that's enough. You don't need the action movie version. Silence. Sophia, 3 tables away, looked at the ground. Jalen said nothing. Emma looked at Rachel Monroe with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite devastation. It was something older than either of those things. The flat, exhausted look of someone who spent years explaining things that shouldn't require explanation. Can I finish? Emma asked. I think we should talk about. Can I finish my presentation? Rachel stopped, looked at her, relented but barely. Oh yes, Emma took a breath. She got exactly 4 more sentences out before Rachel asked for documentation again. And when Emma said she had none with her, because she was 10 years old on a field trip with sandwiches and a water bottle and a drawing, not a military records vault, that was when Rachel reached over and picked up the project board from Emma's lap. I'm going to hold this, she said, until we can verify what. A gust rolled through the clearing. Rachel's grip slipped. The board caught the wind edge on and sailed off to the left, landing face down in the damp grass beside the shelter. One corner folded under. The carefully rendered drawing of Luke and Atlas pressed into the mud. Rachel looked at it, didn't move immediately. Emma stared at it for a long moment. She didn't cry. She had the specific, hard-won discipline of a child who has learned that crying in public costs more than it recovers. But her jaw had set in a way that aged her face by about 15 years, and her knuckles on the wheelchair rims had gone white. "I'll get it," Jalen said, already moving. He was pulling the board carefully from the mud when Atlas barked. One bark, sharp, directional, from the far end of the tree-lined path that led back toward the parking lot. Everyone turned. The dog came out of the tree shadow first. Belgian Malinois, amber and brown, working dog's body chest forward, ears forward, completely controlled in motion, not running but moving with that compressed efficiency that looked casual until you understood it wasn't. He was on a long lead, and the lead was held by a man who walked with the particular carriage of someone who had spent years moving through difficult terrain and had simply never stopped. He wasn't in uniform. Dark jacket, worn canvas pants, hiking boots. He looked like a man who'd just parked a car and taken a trail. He looked ordinary. Except his eyes had already swept the clearing, cataloged everything in it, noted the group dynamics and the body language and the project board in the mud before he'd taken 5 steps out of the trees. Emma's whole face shifted. The set jaw, the white knuckles, the controlled stillness, all of it broke at once. Dad. Luke Calloway's expression didn't change dramatically. There was just a slight ease around his eyes, something released, and he walked toward his daughter. Atlas came with him. The dog's ears stayed forward until they reached Emma, and then his posture changed, tail moving in that particular efficient Malinois way that wasn't the wide wag of a Labrador, but something more contained and equally certain. Emma's hand went to his head. Luke looked at the board in Jalen's hands, looked at the mud on it, looked at Emma. A quick read. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said, the automatic answer. Then, quieter, my board fell. He took it from Jalen, thanked him by name even though he'd never met the kid he'd heard Emma mention him, enough to remember, and turned it over in his hands. Assessed the damage. The drawing was smeared at the bottom right corner. One of the index cards was warped, but the image was largely intact. He wiped the mud from the corner with the edge of his jacket sleeve carefully, set it back across Emma's lap. Then he looked at Rachel Monroe. Rachel had gone pale. Not dramatically, just the specific pallor of someone who has just understood that the ground under their argument was less solid than advertised. Luke regarded her for a moment. He had the Navy SEAL's particular talent for silence. He could make a room very conscious of itself without saying anything. "Mr. Calloway," Rachel started Luke. His voice was even. Not angry. Not warm. Just level. We were having a discussion about the presentations. "What did you say to her?" he asked. Not loudly. Not threateningly. Just directly. Rachel hesitated. "I asked about verification. For the factual claims. You asked a 10-year-old on a field trip to verify classified operational history. I didn't know it was..." "What specifically?" Luke said. "Did you tell her was wrong?" A long pause. Doug, the park coordinator, had drifted closer. 2 parents who'd come as chaperones had turned fully around. Rachel exhaled. "I suggested that some of the story might have been embellished, or grown over time. I was trying to protect the other students from what?" The question landed. Rachel didn't have an immediate answer. Luke looked at her with no particular emotion visible, which was somehow worse than anger. "You took her presentation in front of the class and told her she was lying about her father." "I didn't use that word." "Did she ask you to stop?" "A beat. She asked me if she could finish her presentation," Emma said from her chair. Her voice had leveled out. "Twice." Luke glanced at his daughter, then back to Rachel. He reached into his jacket's interior pocket and produced a folded document. He set it on the nearest picnic table, opened it flat, and stepped back from it. It was his active duty identification and a unit certification. He didn't explain what was on it. He let Rachel read it. She read it. Her hands were very still. "Atlas," he said. The dog sat. "Working dog certification is at the bottom," Luke said. 8 years of deployment. 2 theater commendations. He's retired now. He lives with us." He picked the document back up and folded it. Then he said, quietly, The thing that would stay in that clearing longer than anything else spoken that morning. She spent 7 days making that presentation. She asked me every fact twice to make sure she had it right. She left out the parts she was told she couldn't discuss. A pause. Before you told her class she was lying, why didn't you ask her one question in private? Rachel had no answer. Around them, the pines moved in a slow wind. Somewhere far down the slope, the creek ran over smooth rock. Emma looked at her board in her lap, the smeared drawing of her father and his dog. Then Doug, the park coordinator, took 2 slow steps forward with the expression of a man who just remembered something he hadn't thought about in years. "Calloway," he said. Luke looked at him. "Luke Calloway." Doug pointed vaguely at his own face like he was trying to locate a memory. 2019. The Myers Creek flood. The search out past the wilderness boundary. Luke was quiet for a moment. "Yeah." "You were part of that response. Team effort." "My cousin was stranded out there," Doug said. His voice had gone different. Her and her husband. They'd been in that elevated hunting blind for something like 36 hours. Primary team had swept that sector twice. He stopped. It was the dog. Luke said nothing. "It was this dog? He'd remember the scent better than I would," Luke said. Doug looked at Atlas, who was sitting beside Emma's chair, with the calm patience of a creature that had done important things and had largely moved on from them. Then he looked at Rachel Monroe, and the silence in that clearing changed its shape entirely. One of the chaperone parents, a tall woman named Greaves, who'd driven the secondary car, had been listening quietly since the moment Atlas barked. Now she tilted her head and said, half to herself, "I read about that. The Myers Creek thing. There was a piece in the Tribune that fall. They mentioned a K9 team." She looked at Luke. "They didn't name the handler. They usually don't," he said. Emma was watching her father. She had heard most of this before, pieces of it, over years. In the particular incremental way he shared things, not stories, exactly. More like answers to specific questions when she asked them the right way. She knew about Myers Creek. She knew about the hunting blind and the 36 hours. She'd included the reference maps in her presentation because of a news photograph she'd found herself, cross-referencing against what he'd told her. She'd left out Doug's cousin's name because she didn't know it, and she hadn't thought to ask her dad, and that felt like a gap she should have filled, but hadn't. She would have asked if Rachel Monroe had let her finish. Around her, she could feel the shift in her classmates. The way 22 fifth graders were very quietly updating their operating assumptions. Not dramatically. Kids didn't do things dramatically, usually, but she could feel it, the recalibration. Sophia was looking at Atlas differently now. Not with fear the dog hadn't moved aggressively once, but with the focused attention of someone seeing something clearly for the first time. Jalen had his hands in his pockets and was looking at Rachel Monroe with the particular expression of a 10-year-old who has filed something away and will not forget it. Rachel herself was very still. She was looking at Emma's project board, the drawing, the smeared corner, the index cards with their careful, twice-verified facts. And her mouth was doing something complicated that wasn't quite an apology yet, but was moving in that direction under pressure that had become too great to resist. Emma held her board in her lap and said nothing. She had tried to finish her presentation twice. She could wait. Rachel Monroe did not apologize in the clearing. That was the thing Emma would remember later, not the absence of the apology itself, but the specific quality of the silence that filled its space. Rachel stood with her arms folded differently now, no longer the firm, authoritative posture from before, but something tighter, more self-protective, and she said the words that people say when they are not ready to be fully wrong, but can no longer pretend to be fully right. "I understand. There may have been some miscommunication." Luke looked at her for a moment without expression. Then he looked at Emma. Emma looked at her board. Doug had moved off to the side and was studying the middle distance with the deliberate neutrality of a man who worked in public spaces and knew when not to insert himself further. The 2 chaperone parents, Greaves, and a heavy-set man named Porto, who'd been quiet through all of it, stood near the shelter with the particular stillness of people processing, something they hadn't expected their Tuesday morning to contain. "Miscommunication," Luke said. Not a question. I made an assumption, Rachel said, based on you told her class she invented her father. I didn't say invented. Action movie version. Emma said it quietly from her chair, not looking up. That's what you said. Rachel's jaw moved. I was concerned about the other students processing information that couldn't be Ms. Monroe. Luke's voice stayed even. This was, Emma had learned, the version of her father that was actually most difficult to argue with. Not the louder version. The louder version only came out during football games. And once, memorably, when a car had cut them off on the highway, and then he'd looked at Emma and made a face at himself and said that was not how a grown adult behaves. This version, the level and unhurried version, was something else entirely. My daughter asked you if she could finish her presentation. Twice. What did you say? A pause. I said yes. And then Rachel looked away briefly. I asked a follow-up question. That ended the presentation. It wasn't. She stopped. Started again. I'm going to need some time to think about how I want to address this with the class. Luke studied her. Take the time you need. He stepped back, but she gets to finish first. The second presentation was nothing like the first. Not because Emma performed it differently. Her voice was almost identical. Same pacing. Same careful precision with the facts she'd chosen to include. But the clearing was different around her now. The air had changed. 22 fifth graders who had watched their teacher publicly dismantle a classmate's story were now sitting with the particular attentiveness of children who have just understood that adults can be wrong in consequential ways and that this information requires careful storage. Emma rolled to the center of the space again. She held the mud-stained board in her lap. She didn't reference what had happened, didn't acknowledge the smear on the corner or the warped index card. Just picked up from where she'd been interrupted and kept going. The second reason my dad is my hero, she said, is what he does at home. Luke had moved to the edge of the clearing. He stood with one shoulder against a pine, Atlas sitting at his left leg. He watched his daughter with the same expression he'd worn when he read her draft, quiet, attentive, giving nothing away. 3 years ago I had a spinal surgery, Emma said. It was the third one. After the surgery, there was a period where we didn't know how much mobility I'd get back. My dad took emergency family leave to be at the hospital. He slept in the chair next to my bed for 11 days. A beat. Chair was too small for him. I could tell it hurt his back. He never said anything about it. Sophia was very still. When I came home, he'd rebuilt the door frame into my bedroom so my chair could fit through without me having to angle it. He did it himself. It took him 2 weekends, and he had to watch YouTube tutorials because he's not a carpenter. A small pause. He also redid the bathroom threshold and put a different handle on the refrigerator so I could open it from my chair. Another pause. He watched a lot of YouTube. A couple of the kids laughed. Genuine, small. He learned how to braid hair, Emma continued. He's not good at it. He'll tell you he's getting better, but I have the photographs to prove otherwise. Atlas tries to help by sitting on my feet while we do it, which is not as helpful as he thinks. More laughter, warmer. Luke at the tree line looked at the ground and almost smiled. My dad is my hero because he's the person who stayed. Not because staying was easy, it wasn't, and he doesn't pretend it was, but because he made a decision that my life was going to be as full as he could make it. And then he showed up every day and did the actual work. She looked up. That's what the presentation is about. Not the SEAL stuff. Not Atlas's certifications, that's just context. About who he is when things are hard. The real story is that he braids my hair badly every Sunday morning and has never once complained about it. The clearing was quiet. Even Rachel Monroe, standing to the side with her arms no longer crossed, didn't speak. Emma set the board back across her lap. That's my hero, she said. Thanks. The bus left Silver Pine at noon. Emma sat at the back on the right side, same as always, chair locked into the floor bracket, Atlas technically not permitted on school transportation but present anyway, because Luke had driven separately and the matter of Atlas riding the bus had never actually come up, so it existed in a bureaucratic gray zone that nobody had yet moved to resolve. The dog lay across her feet, warm and heavy, and Emma looked out the window at the trees going past. Rachel Monroe sat at the front. She didn't turn around for the whole 40-minute drive. Jalen sat beside Emma and didn't say much, which was one of the things Emma genuinely appreciated about him, his ability to calibrate how much conversation a situation required. He played a game on his phone for a while and then put it away and looked out his own window. "She's not going to just say sorry," he said eventually. "I know. Like, not easily. I know, Jalen. Because then she'd have to admit she was wrong in front of everyone." Emma kept looking out the window. "People have a hard time with that. Your dad was really calm. He's always calm, like scary calm. He'd say it's not scary. It's just there's no point in being loud when the facts are already doing the work." Jalen considered this. "That's kind of a scary thing to say." Emma almost smiled. "Yeah." The school's main office sat at the end of the ground floor corridor, separated from the front entrance by a short hallway with 2 benches and a bulletin board advertising the upcoming winter fundraiser. Principal Deborah Haynes was 53, had been running Clearwater Elementary for 9 years, had seen most things, and was on her 3rd coffee of the day when Rachel Monroe knocked on her open door at 2:15 and asked if she had a minute. Haynes looked at her over her reading glasses. "Sit down," she said. Rachel sat. What followed was not a comfortable conversation. Haynes had already received 2 text messages from parent chaperones by the time the buses returned, and she'd read them both with the careful attention of someone assembling a preliminary account before the first-hand version arrived. She let Rachel talk without interrupting, which was not a technique she used with everyone, only the ones she needed to hear fully before responding. Rachel's version was not dishonest. It was just incomplete in the specific ways that a person's account of their own mistakes tends to be. The framing was slightly off, the chronology slightly compressed around the moments of highest exposure. When she finished, Haynes took off her glasses and set them on the desk. "Did you pick up the presentation board?" she asked. "It blew off. Did you pick it up?" A pause. "No." "Did Emma's father pick it up?" He wiped the mud off. "And did any adult in that clearing pick it up before he arrived?" Rachel was quiet. Haynes put her glasses back on. "I'm going to need written statements from both chaperones and a full written account from you by end of week. I'm also going to be calling Emma's father this afternoon." She paused. Not to inform him, he was there, to hear his account. "I understand, Rachel." Haynes's voice wasn't kind, but it was precise. "You've been here 2 years. You're a good teacher. You design good lessons. But what you described publicly challenging a child's account of her own family in front of her peers without any private verification first, that's a harm. Even if you'd been right about the facts, which you weren't, it would have been a harm." Rachel's hands were folded in her lap. The assignment asked them to present a real-life hero. Emma presented her father. Your role at that point was to facilitate, not audit. She was making specific claims about her father. Haynes let that sit, which he was able to confirm in person. But even if he hadn't been there, Rachel, she's 10. What were you going to do with unverified claims from a 10-year-old's hero presentation? Flag it to the Pentagon. Rachel didn't answer. "Go home," Haynes said. "Write the statement. I'll call you tomorrow." Luke's call came at 4:40. He was sitting in his truck in the school parking lot. He'd driven Emma home first, made sure she had a snack, left Atlas with her because the dog had a monitoring instinct that functioned better than most electronic alternatives, and then driven back because he'd wanted to speak to Haynes in person rather than by phone. But she'd called before he reached the front door, and he'd answered in the parking lot instead. Haynes was direct. He appreciated that. "I want to be clear about what I'm doing," she said. "I'm not calling to manage your reaction. I'm calling because you have a right to know how the school is handling this." "I appreciate that," he said. "I'm going to be honest with you. Ms. Monroe is not a bad teacher. She made a significant error in judgment today. I believe she knows it. What I don't yet know is how deep that goes, whether it was a one-time lapse or something more systemic in how she approaches students." "She didn't ask a single private question," Luke said, "before going public." "I know, she had the assignment in advance. She reviewed the submissions." A pause. "Emma wrote that her father was a Navy SEAL with a K9 partner. That seemed extraordinary. The right move was a quiet conversation before the field trip, not a public challenge during the presentation." "You're correct." Emma asked her to stop. "Twice, I know that too." Luke was quiet for a moment. Through the windshield, the school's front steps were empty. The last stragglers had cleared out, the buses long gone. A woman walked past with a younger kid, holding hands. Just regular Tuesday afternoon life, indifferent to everything that had happened 11 miles north in a pine clearing. "What I want," he said, "is for Emma to be able to go back into that classroom on Wednesday without it being a thing, without her classmates treating her differently because her dad showed up at a field trip and things got complicated. Can't fully control how 10-year-olds process things," Haynes said. "I know. I'm saying what I want. I'm not expecting you to guarantee it." Pause. "That's a reasonable distinction. I'm also going to ask Emma what she wants. Whatever she says, I'll pass along." "That's good parenting, Mr. Calloway." He didn't say anything to that. "I'll be in contact by end of week," Haynes said, with the formal response. He thanked her and ended the call and sat in the parking lot for a while, not doing anything in particular, just letting the day settle. Emma was at the kitchen table when he got home, her chair angled so she could reach both the table surface and the lower shelf where she kept her markers. Atlas was on his dog bed in the corner, which meant she'd probably told him to go there because she wanted space to think, which was a thing she'd started doing around age 8 and which he respected entirely. She was drawing. Not the presentation. Something new. He could see it was Atlas. She drew Atlas frequently, always getting the ears slightly wrong in a way that Atlas probably would have had opinions about if he'd been capable of opinions about two-dimensional representations of himself. Luke set his keys on the hook by the door, toed off his boots, went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, brought one to the table, and set it within her reach without comment. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I'm okay." He sat down across from her. Kitchen table was the same one they'd had for 6 years, a wide oak thing he'd bought secondhand from an estate sale because it was solid and low enough to work for Emma's chair. There was a scratch on the near corner from when she'd been 7 and they'd been assembling a bookshelf together and dropped a bracket. "You don't have to be okay," he said. She kept drawing. "I know. What happened today was not okay. I know that too, Dad." He watched her work for a moment. The careful way she moved the marker, the slight furrow between her brows that appeared when she was concentrating. "Ms. Haynes called me," he said. The marker stopped. "She's handling it formally. Written statements, review process." Emma set the marker down, looked at him. She had her mother's eyes, that particular dark hazel that shifted depending on the light, and right now they were doing that thing where she was measuring him, checking whether he was reporting facts or managing her. He was reporting facts. "What do you want to happen?" she asked. "I want it handled correctly," he said. "I want the school to understand what went wrong so it doesn't happen to another kid." "What about Ms. Monroe?" He thought about this. "I think she made a bad call. I don't know her well enough to say what she is, but I don't think the goal is to destroy her." Emma picked up the marker again. "She took my board." She did, in front of everyone. "I know." A long pause. Atlas had lifted his head from the dog bed without being called and was watching Emma with the particular attention he reserved for moments when her emotional register was elevated. He didn't come over, just watched. "She said, 'Action movie, Father,'" Emma said, "like I was embarrassed about you and trying to make you into something better." Luke was quiet. "You are better," she said, "than the action movie version. The action movie version doesn't watch YouTube tutorials about door frames." He looked at the table. "I'm not okay," she said, "but I will be." He nodded. She went back to drawing. After a while, Atlas decided the situation had reached a manageable equilibrium and went back to sleep on his bed. Outside, the October light was going gold and long across the kitchen floor, the way it did this time of year, the angle changing with the season. Luke drank his water. Emma drew her dog. Following morning, Wednesday, was the first real test. Clearwater Elementary ran on a schedule tight enough that there was no buffer between the bus arrival and the start of first period, which meant Emma arrived with approximately 4 minutes to get to class before the bell and had no time for the kind of deliberate, prepared entrance she might have preferred. She came through the main door, down the accessible corridor, turned left at the library, and was in the classroom doorway before she'd finished deciding how she wanted her face to look. 21 pairs of eyes. Rachel Monroe at the whiteboard, marker in hand, mid-sentence about the day's first lesson. The sentence stopped. Emma rolled in. "Good morning, Emma," Rachel said. "Morning," Emma said. She went to her space at the table. She had a designated spot near the side wall, worked out at the beginning of the year with the school's accessibility coordinator, with enough clearance for her chair in multiple positions. She pulled out her binder, uncapped her pen. Around her, the classroom settled back into its ordinary sounds. Chairs scraping, papers rustling, someone's water bottle rolling off a desk and being caught. Jalen, 2 seats over, did not look at her in the pointed way that people look at someone when they're trying not to look at them. He just glanced over normally and went back to his own binder. That, Emma decided, was fine. That was enough for now. Rachel resumed the lesson. Her voice was steady, professionally managed, and somewhere underneath it, there was something that Emma couldn't fully name, not guilt exactly, but a kind of carefulness that hadn't been there before Tuesday. Like a person walking across a floor they'd previously assumed was solid and were now less sure of. Emma wrote the date at the top of her page. She would have to get through this week first, then the week after. She was 10, and she understood, in the particular practical way, that children who have been through difficult medical experiences tend to understand things, that getting through something was not the same as it not having happened. Both things would remain true simultaneously. You carried the thing and kept moving anyway. She knew this because her father had never pretended otherwise. He hadn't told her surgery number 3 would be fine. He'd told her it would be hard, they would get through it, and he would be there for every part. He'd been accurate on all 3 counts. She uncapped her second pen red for annotations and waited for the lesson to get to a part that needed annotating. Sophia across the table passed her a folded note. Emma opened it under the table's edge, habit from 3rd grade, when note passing had been a more contested activity. "Your drawing of Atlas was really good," it said. "Even the muddy part, actually maybe better with the mud. More realistic." Emma looked across at Sophia, who was watching the board with an expression of complete innocence. Emma folded the note back up and put it in her binder pocket. Something in her chest, which had been held carefully in one position since the field trip, shifted slightly. Not resolved, not healed, but moved, just incrementally, in the direction of the people who'd been decent. She wrote the date on a clean page. At her feet, in the hallway visible through the open classroom door, Atlas was theoretically waiting in the truck in the school parking lot because Luke had driven her in this morning instead of putting her on the bus. He'd said it was because he had errands to run in that direction. She hadn't believed him for a second, but she'd let him have it, because sometimes that's the thing you do for the people who show up when the floor drops out. You let them have the small fictions that make the showing up easier to carry. She pressed her pen to the page. Wednesday continued, and somewhere in the school's main office, the wheels of something larger had already begun to turn in ways that none of them, not Emma, not Luke, not Rachel Monroe, standing at her whiteboard with her carefully controlled voice, had yet fully reckoned with. The chaperone statements were due by Friday. Haynes had already been on a call with the district's student welfare coordinator that morning, and a parent named Greaves, who had stood at the edge of the silver pine, clearing with her arms folded and her face doing calculations, had gone home Tuesday evening and begun typing a detailed account of what she'd witnessed, not out of malice, she would later say, but because she had a daughter in 2nd grade at the same school, and she believed in documentation. The document was 11 paragraphs long. She sent it to Haynes at 8:47 Wednesday morning. Haynes read it twice before her second coffee. Then she picked up the phone and called the district. The district's student welfare coordinator was a woman named Patricia Ellsworth, and she had been doing this job for 14 years, which meant she had developed a specific kind of radar for the calls that were going to require more than a policy reminder and a filed report. Haynes's call on Wednesday morning was one of those calls. Ellsworth listened without interrupting, which was her standard practice she'd learned early, that principals who called the district before 9 a.m. had usually been sitting with something overnight, and the overnight version was often more accurate than the version they'd polish if given more time. When Haynes finished, Ellsworth asked 3 questions. Was the child physically unharmed? Were there multiple adult witnesses? Had the teacher's account been received in writing yet? Yes, no, and not yet. Get the written accounts before Friday, Ellsworth said. All of them. Parent chaperones, park staff, the teacher. I want them on my desk Friday afternoon. I already have one from a parent chaperone, Haynes said, unsolicited. She sent it this morning. A pause on Ellsworth's end. How detailed? 11 paragraphs. Another pause. I'll clear my Friday afternoon. Rachel Monroe wrote her statement Thursday evening at her kitchen table, starting at 7 and finishing close to 11. She wrote 4 drafts. The first was defensive in ways she recognized and deleted. The second overcorrected into a kind of performative self-flagellation that felt dishonest in the opposite direction. The third was closer, factual, sequential, with her reasoning included but not rationalized. The fourth was the third, minus 2 sentences she'd included about Emma's extraordinary claims that she realized, reading them back, still framed the situation as though the problem had been the claims rather than her response to them. She printed it, read it once more, and set it in her work bag. Then she sat at the table for a while not doing anything. She had a master's degree and a genuine commitment to her students, and she had publicly told a disabled 10-year-old that her father was a fiction. These things were all simultaneously true, and the discomfort of holding them together was, she was beginning to understand, not something she was going to be able to resolve quickly or cleanly. She'd looked up Luke Calloway's name on Wednesday night. Not in a way she could use. The operational records weren't public, and the few news references that existed from the Myers Creek operation were brief and credited to a task force rather than individuals. But the park coordinator's recognition had been specific, and the parent's account in Haynes's office had included details that corroborated Emma's presentation on multiple points. Emma had been right. Not approximately right. Not right in the general spirit of the thing. Specifically, documentably, verifiably right, down to the operational details a 10-year-old had twice checked against her primary source and then carefully partitioned into speakable and unspeakable categories. The assignment had asked for a real-life hero. Emma had delivered one with footnotes. Rachel put her head in her hands and stayed there for a minute. Then she got up, washed her face, and went to bed because there was nothing else useful to do that night, and she had 22 students showing up at 8A. The Friday meeting was not what Luke had expected. He'd anticipated something administrative, a principal's office conversation with forms and carefully worded language, and a resolution that was thorough on paper and modest in practice. He'd been through enough institutional processes in his career to know how they worked, the way outcomes got managed into acceptable shapes, the gap between what the documentation said and what actually changed. What he found instead was a conference room on the 3rd floor of the district building with 4 people already seated when he arrived. Haynes, Ellsworth, a woman introduced as the district's disability inclusion officer named Sandra Chu, and a man named Reeves from the school board's student affairs office who was taking notes on a legal pad. Luke sat down. Atlas was in the truck. Emma was at school. Luke had not told Emma the specifics of this meeting because he didn't yet know the specifics himself, and he'd learned in a different context that briefing people on incomplete intelligence created more problems than it solved. Ellsworth ran the meeting. She was in her mid-50s, compact, with the specific efficiency of someone who had managed a large number of difficult conversations and had stopped wasting words somewhere around year 7. Mr. Calloway, she said, I want to be direct with you about what this meeting is and isn't. It's not a disciplinary hearing that's a separate process with separate procedures. What it is an opportunity for us to hear your account directly, explain the steps we're taking, and discuss what appropriate remediation looks like for Emma specifically. I appreciate the directness, Luke said. Ms. Monroe submitted her written statement yesterday evening. We've received statements from both parent chaperones and the park coordinator. We've also had a preliminary conversation with Ms. Monroe about her conduct. Ellsworth paused. Before we go further, what is Emma's current state? How is she doing? She went back to class Wednesday, Luke said. She's managing it. She's a capable kid. He paused. But she knows what happened. She'll know whatever comes out of this, too. She doesn't miss things. What does she want? Chu asked. She was younger than the others, direct in a different way, the kind of direct that came from working specifically with kids and families rather than administration. Luke considered. She wants to be able to go to school without it being a thing. She wants to know it won't happen to another kid. She told me both of those things herself. He paused. She also said she doesn't want to destroy Ms. Monroe. Her words. Something moved across Haynes' face. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. She's 10, Luke said. She figured out that wanting someone to face consequences and wanting to destroy them are different things. I thought that was worth passing along. The room was quiet for a moment. Reeves wrote something on his legal pad. The formal outcome arrived in writing the following Tuesday in a letter addressed to Luke, drafted jointly by Ellsworth and Chu and reviewed by the board's legal office. It ran to 3 pages. Luke read it at the kitchen table after Emma had gone to bed, Atlas lying across his feet under the chair. The key elements were these. Rachel Monroe would receive a formal disciplinary notation in her personnel file. She would complete mandatory training in 3 areas: student dignity and due process, disability, inclusion and implicit bias, and responsible fact-checking in classroom settings. A review of her teaching practice would be conducted over the following semester with monthly check-ins by the school's instructional coach. Additionally, and this was the part that had not been Luke's idea, but which Haynes had pushed for internally, Clearwater Elementary would revise its policy for student presentations. Going forward, if a teacher had concerns about factual accuracy in a student's submitted work, those concerns would be addressed privately with the student and, if necessary, the family prior to any public presentation. Under no circumstances would a student's account be publicly challenged without prior private verification. Policy change would apply school-wide. It would be included in the staff handbook starting next semester. Luke read the letter twice. Then he folded it and set it on the table and sat for a while. He was not satisfied in the way that felt clean or conclusive. He was satisfied in the way you are when an institutional process works roughly, as it should imperfectly, slowly, with the characteristic friction of organizations that have to balance multiple competing interests simultaneously. It wasn't enough, and it was something. Both of those things at once. He thought about Emma at the kitchen table, drawing Atlas with the ears slightly wrong. He thought about the mud on the corner of the project board. He folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and put it in the drawer where he kept documents. He told Emma the following morning over breakfast. Not all of it, the personnel file notation, wasn't her business, and he decided that some of the institutional machinery was information she didn't need to carry. Policy change, yes. That one he told her fully. She was eating cereal. She processed it with the specific stillness she used when she was integrating something significant. They changed the rule, she said, for the whole school. Because of me. Because of what happened to you, he said. There's a difference. She thought about this. Ate another spoonful. Does Ms. Monroe know? She asked. She was part of the process. Yes. Is she still my teacher? Yes. Emma nodded slowly. How do you feel about that? He asked. She scraped the last of the cereal from the bowl. I don't know yet, she said. I'll figure it out when I'm there. That was, he thought, a completely reasonable answer. The thing nobody had anticipated was the assembly. It wasn't called an assembly, it was listed on the weekly schedule as a community learning session, which was Haynes's terminology for the events she organized when something had happened in the school community that needed addressing, openly rather than absorbed quietly and moved past. She'd done 3 of them in 9 years, once after a student's parent died suddenly, once after an incident of bullying that had gone further than anyone had caught in time, and now this. She didn't call it what it was about. The announcement just said, 5th grade community learning session, Thursday afternoon gym, parents welcome. Emma found out through the class schedule on Wednesday and said nothing about it until she was in the truck on the way home. The assembly thing, she said. I saw it, Luke said. Is it about me? He kept his eyes on the road. Probably about what happened. Not about you specifically. That's basically the same thing. It's really not. She was quiet for a block. Am I supposed to do something? Say something? I don't think you're required to, but he glanced at her. But Haynes asked if you'd be willing to speak, briefly, if you wanted. She was clear it was optional. Emma looked out the window at the passing street, the regular residential blocks of their neighborhood, the oak tree at the corner that still had half its leaves, even this late in October. What would I say? Whatever's true, he said. Another block. I'll think about it, she said. She thought about it for a day and a half, which was approximately how long she'd spent deciding on the content of the original presentation. On Thursday morning, she told Luke she would speak, and she told him what she planned to say, and he listened without editing it. It was not a long speech. She didn't need long. The gym at Clearwater Elementary held about 300 people when configured for the fold-out bleachers and additional chairs on the floor. On Thursday afternoon, it held the entire 5th grade, a significant portion of the 4th and 6th grades who shared the wing, 40-something parents who'd received the optional attendance notice and chosen to come, and the school's full teaching staff. Rachel Monroe sat in the second row of staff chairs. Luke stood at the back of the gym with Atlas on a short lead. He'd gotten clearance from Haynes for the dog's presence, framed as an educational component for what was already developing into a broader conversation about service animals and working K9s. This was technically accurate. It was also the reason he'd wanted Atlas there, which was simpler. Emma liked knowing where they both were. Haynes opened the session. She was good at this, clear, measured, without the institutional blandness that drained meaning from the words. She talked about dignity, about the responsibility adults had toward the children in their care, about the specific harm of public doubt directed at a child, and about the school's new policy, which she explained in plain language. She didn't name Emma. She didn't name Rachel Monroe. She didn't need to. In a room of 300 people, a significant number of whom had children in 5th grade, the context was not obscure. Then she introduced Emma. Emma had positioned herself to the side of the small podium. The podium was too high for her sightline from her chair, and they'd worked out in advance that she'd speak from a space beside it with a handheld microphone, which one of the school's AV kids would hold at the right angle. The gym was not quiet in the way a held breath is quiet. It was quiet in the way a room is quiet when a large number of people are paying attention to the same thing simultaneously. Emma took the microphone. She looked out at the rows of faces, kids her age and a little older and a little younger, adults. Her teacher in the second row, hands folded in her lap. Her father at the back, tall enough to be visible over most of the heads. Atlas, a dark shape at his knee. She thought about the presentation in the clearing. The wax paper coming off the board, the way the gust had caught it. She'd practiced what she wanted to say. She'd said something slightly different. I don't want this to be about Ms. Monroe being a bad person, she said. The microphone was good. Her voice carried clearly. Because I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened is she heard something that sounded impossible to her, and she decided her idea of what was possible mattered more than my actual experience. And then she acted on that in front of everyone before she checked. The gym was very still. That's not a villain thing, Emma said. That's a human thing. People do it all the time. They see something that doesn't fit what they already know, and instead of asking a question, they decide the thing must be wrong. A pause. I've done it. Probably everyone in here has done it. Another pause. Problem is when you're a teacher and the person you're doing it to is a kid, because the kid doesn't have the same power to push back, and everyone else is watching. And the kid's drawing ends up in the mud. A couple of younger kids near the front shifted. An adult somewhere to the right exhaled. I'm not asking for anything from Ms. Monroe, Emma said. She already apologized to me privately, which I appreciated. I wanted to say it out loud. For the record, in front of everyone who was watching, I wasn't lying. My dad is who he is. Atlas is real. The missions were real. And none of that was why I picked him as my hero anyway. She let that sit for a moment. I picked him because he redid 3 door frames in our house with YouTube tutorials, and because he learned to braid hair and is still bad at it after a year and a half of trying, and because when I was in the hospital he slept in a chair that was too small for him for 11 days and never mentioned it. She looked at the back of the room. It's my hero. That's who I was talking about in the clearing. The SEAL stuff is just context. Luke, at the back of the gym, was looking at the floor. Atlas had his ears forward. Emma handed the microphone back to the AV kid. The gym shifted in the particular way that spaces shift after something honest has been said in them, a collective readjustment, the kind that's partly physical and partly something else, the sense of a room updating its understanding of itself. Haynes returned to the front. She didn't try to add much to what Emma had said. There wasn't much to add. What came next was unplanned. Rachel Monroe stood up. She didn't ask for the microphone initially. She just stood, and the room registered this, and Haynes looked at her, and the AV kid, a sixth grader named Marcus, who was very good at reading rooms, held the microphone out toward her without being asked. Rachel took it. She was facing forward toward the assembled students and parents and staff. She looked like a person who had made a decision and was now executing it before she could reconsider. "I want to say something," she said. "And I want to say it here, in front of everyone who was there, and everyone who wasn't, because Emma was humiliated publicly, and it seems right that this happen in the same way." The gym listened. "I made a decision in that clearing that I've spent the last week trying to understand," Rachel said. Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of effort rather than ease. "What I keep coming back to is this. I didn't challenge Emma's presentation because I had evidence she was wrong. I challenged it because what she described didn't match what I assumed was possible. A single father, a seal, a working dog, all of it together." She paused. "It sounded like too much, so I decided it probably wasn't true." She looked at Emma, who was sitting to the side of the podium with her hands in her lap. "The thing I keep thinking about," Rachel said, "is that Emma's presentation was actually better than any other one I've seen in 2 years of teaching. Not because of the Navy SEAL part. Because she knew the difference between what she was allowed to say and what she wasn't. She understood that some information was classified, and she partitioned it correctly and left it out. She cited public sources. She distinguished between verifiable and anecdotal." A pause. "She was more rigorous than most adults I know. And I responded to that by taking her board." Something in the room moved. Not sound. Just a kind of collective shift in weight. "I'm sorry, Emma," Rachel said. "Not for the version where I made a mistake about the facts. For the version where I decided my assumption was worth more than your dignity. Those are different things. And the second one is worse." She handed the microphone back to Marcus. She sat down. The gym was quiet for 3 full seconds, an eternity in a room of 300 people, and then Haynes said something brief and transitional about the new policy, and the session moved into its next phase, and the particular suspended quality of those 3 seconds dissolved into the ordinary noise of people and chairs and an afternoon in October. Luke brought Atlas home that afternoon and took him for a long run along the trail behind the neighborhood, the one that ran parallel to the drainage creek and turned back north through a section of second-growth timber. Atlas ran beside him without a lead, which he was reliable enough for on this particular trail. They'd run it maybe 200 times. He wasn't thinking in any organized way. He was just running, which was what he did when he needed his body occupied, so his head could work at its own pace without his trying to direct it. Emma had done what he'd spent years trying to teach her to do, distinguish between what a situation was and what it felt like. Identify the actual goal. Pursue it without getting derailed by what would have felt satisfying in the short term. She'd stood in a gym in front of 300 people and declined to make Rachel Monroe a villain, even when the room would have let her. She was 10. He ran harder. Atlas matched him without breaking form, ears back, moving with that ground-covering efficiency that looked effortless and wasn't. The dog was 9 years old and still ran like he was 4. The joints would start telling a different story eventually, and Luke was already aware of this and had already begun quietly dreading it, which he would not have admitted to most people. The trail curved north and the timber closed in on both sides, and for a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of their footfalls and the creek somewhere below, and the last light coming through the canopy at an angle that turned everything briefly gold. He ran until the gold went gray. Then he turned back. Emma was at the kitchen table when he came in, which had become her default location for processing things. Atlas went straight to her and put his head in her lap, which she accepted, scratching behind his ears in the way that made his back foot do the involuntary tapping thing. "How was the run?" she asked. "Good." He was breathing harder than he usually let himself show. "You were gone a while." "Yeah." She looked at him, the measuring look. He got a glass of water, drank half of it, looked at his daughter. "That was a brave thing you did today," he said. "It needed to be said." "I know." It was still brave. She went back to the dog, scratched his ear. The foot tapped. "She meant it," Emma said. "Ms. Monroe, the apology." "I think so too. It's still going to be weird in class for a while." "Probably. But it'll get less weird." He set down the glass. "It usually does." She nodded slowly, looking at Atlas. The dog's eyes were half closed, which was as close as he got to fully relaxed, in the presence of two people he was responsible for. "Dad," Emma said. "Yeah. The doorframe thing. In the presentation. What about it?" "I heard you tell Mr. Vargas next door that you did the bathroom threshold wrong the first time and had to redo it." He was quiet. "You redid it in the middle of the night, so I wouldn't notice it hadn't been right." He picked up his glass. It was empty. He put it back down. "Figured you knew," he said. "I knew," she said. "I just wanted you to know I knew." Atlas's foot tapped twice against the chair leg. Outside, the October dark had settled fully over the neighborhood, and the kitchen light made the window a mirror, showing them both the man standing at the counter and the girl in the chair and the dog between them, in a house with 3 redone door frames and a badly braided Sunday tradition and enough unspoken history to fill a room. Emma went back to drawing. Luke started on dinner. The house held its ordinary sounds around them, the refrigerator hum, the scratch of pencil on paper, the creak of a floorboard when Atlas shifted, and none of it was remarkable except in the way that unremarkable things now become remarkable when you've come close enough to losing them to know what they're actually worth. The index cards stayed on the table through the rest of November and into December, and Luke had learned to work around them the way you learn to work around anything that belongs to someone else's process, carefully, without comment, giving the thing the space it needed. But the cards weren't the only thing that stayed. The video had plateaued at somewhere north of 60,000 shares before it began its slow retreat from active circulation, and in the weeks that followed, Luke found himself managing a category of attention he hadn't encountered before and didn't have a clean protocol for. Not operational attention, he had procedures for that, had spent years maintaining a low profile with the specific discipline of someone who understood what exposure cost. This was different. This was the attention of strangers who felt they knew something true about him based on 4 minutes of footage and who wanted to communicate that feeling. Emails came through the school's general contact form, forwarded by Haynes's office. Cards arrived addressed simply to the Navy SEAL Dad, Clearwater Elementary, Washington. The Postal Service delivered them anyway, which said something about either the volume or the specificity of the handwriting on the envelopes. A veterans organization in Tacoma reached out through a mutual contact asking if Luke would speak at their spring fundraiser. A disability advocacy group in Seattle sent a formal letter requesting permission to reference the video in their awareness campaign materials. He read everything once, responded to almost none of it. The ones he did respond to were 3 letters, not emails. Letters, handwritten from parents of kids with disabilities who had written not about Luke at all, but about their own children. One from a mother in Oregon whose 9-year-old son used a power wheelchair and had been told by a substitute teacher that his account of his father's work as a marine biologist was probably exaggerated. One from a father in Montana whose daughter had given a presentation about her mother, an ER physician, and had been asked by a classmate in front of the class, with the teacher present and silent, whether her mom was really a doctor or just a nurse who told people she was a doctor. The 3rd letter was from a grandmother in California. Her granddaughter was 12, used hearing aids, and had been dismissed so many times in so many small ways that she had stopped volunteering information about herself entirely. She just went quiet. The grandmother wrote that she had shown the granddaughter the video and that the granddaughter had watched it twice and that afterward she had said, and the grandmother had written this down exactly, because she didn't want to get it wrong. She didn't stop talking, even when the teacher tried to make her feel stupid about it. Luke read that one sitting in his truck in the school parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in November, and he sat with it for a long time before he folded it back into the envelope. He wrote back to all three. Short letters, handwritten, which took him 3 drafts each because he was not a natural letter writer and kept producing versions that were either too operational in tone or too personal in the wrong direction. The final version said approximately the same thing in different words, that Emma hadn't done what she did because she was exceptional in some portable, replicable way, but because she'd spent 10 years being told clearly and consistently that her experience of the world was real and valid and worth defending. That was the thing, if there was a thing. Not a technique, just a decade of someone showing up and saying, your life is not a lesser version of something else. It is exactly what it is, and it is enough. He didn't know if that was useful to anyone. He sent the letters anyway. Emma found out about them in early December when she spotted an envelope on the counter with his handwriting on it before he'd gotten to the mailbox. You wrote someone a letter, she said. 3 someones. She looked at him. About what? About you. She was quiet. Not about the video, he said. About the thing the video was actually about. She picked up the envelope and looked at the address, which didn't tell her much. Can I read them? I already sent the other 2. Can I read this one before you send it? He thought about it, handed it to her. She read it at the kitchen table, Atlas at her feet. She read it slowly, which was not her usual reading pace. She was fast with most things, but this she went through carefully. The way she went through things she wanted to understand fully before she moved past them. When she finished, she set it down on the table. The thing you wrote, she said, about someone showing up and saying the experience is real. Yeah, you were talking about yourself, among others. She looked at the letter. You never say stuff like that out loud. To me, I mean, no, why? He leaned against the counter. This was a real question, and she was waiting for a real answer, which meant he needed to find one. 'Cause I always figured the doing was the saying, he said. The door frames, the chair, the hospital. He paused. I didn't think I needed to also announce it. She considered this. You don't, she said. But it's also okay to say it sometimes. Yeah, both can be true. Yeah. She picked up the letter and handed it back to him. It's a good letter, she said. Send it. He put it in his jacket pocket. She went back to the index cards on the table, moving one to a new position, looking at the arrangement with her head slightly tilted the way she did when she was close to something, but not quite there. He watched her for a moment. Then he got his keys and went to the mailbox, and the December air outside was cold and clean, and somewhere in the neighborhood a kid was riding a bike on a sidewalk that had been shoveled clear, and the ordinary afternoon held everything in its ordinary way, the houses and the bare trees and the low gray sky, and the specific knowledge that inside, his daughter was almost finished, saying something true, and that when she finished, it would be exactly right. He dropped the letter in the box, walked back inside, made coffee, waited. Dinner that night was pasta, because it was Friday, and pasta was the Friday default had been since Emma was 7, and had announced with complete conviction that pasta on Fridays was a rule and they were keeping it. Luke had not argued. It was a reasonable rule. It required less decision-making at the end of a week, and decision fatigue was real. And Emma had understood this intuitively before she'd had language for it. He made it the same way he always did, olive oil, garlic, whatever vegetables were about to turn in the crisper. Pasta cooked 2 minutes less than the package said because Emma liked it with some resistance. She sat at the kitchen table and did homework while he cooked, and Atlas patrolled the perimeter between the table and the stove in the specific hoping pattern he ran whenever food was being prepared, which had never once resulted in anything being dropped for him, and which he pursued with undiminished optimism. The ordinary rhythm of a Friday. Except Luke's phone had been doing something unusual since about 4 o'clock, which was receiving text messages from a number he recognized but hadn't heard from in 14 months. The number belonged to a man named Carver. Full name Daniel Carver, Currently a senior training coordinator at a facility, Luke didn't name out loud to civilians, formerly his commanding officer for 3 years during a period of Luke's service that existed in that particular documentation stratum, where the paper trail was technically present but required specific clearance levels to access. Carver didn't text casually. The last time he'd reached out, it had been about a teammate's memorial service. The time before that, a formal inquiry that Luke had needed to respond to through channels. The current messages were neither of those things. First had come at 4:12, saw something online. Call me when you're clear. The second at 5:47, not urgent, but worth talking. Luke had read both in the parking lot after the assembly, while Emma was still inside collecting her things. He'd processed them and set the phone face down on the passenger seat and driven home and started dinner, because dinner needed starting, and whatever Carver wanted could wait until Emma was in bed. She went to bed at 9:30. She pushed for 9:45 on Fridays and sometimes got it. Tonight she got it. He called Carver at 10. Carver picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting. Luke, Dan, how's the kid? She's good. How'd you know about? There's a video. Luke stopped. Parent at the field trip, Carver said. Not one of yours. Different family. They posted it Tuesday evening, and it got picked up Wednesday morning. It's been moving around. Luke was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, one lamp on at the counter. Atlas was on his bed in the corner. The house was quiet in the particular way it got. After Emma was asleep, a different quality of quiet, less like absence and more like held breath. How far? Luke asked. Far enough that I saw it in my feed and I'm not on social media more than twice a week. One of my guys sent it to me. He recognized you. A pause. Comment section is it's a lot. What kind of a lot? Mostly supportive. Some of the comments about the teacher are not what I'd call measured. There's some military community sharing it. That's the part I wanted to flag. Luke put his elbow on the table. How much of my background is in the comments? Nothing operational. Your name. Emma's name, first name only in the video, but someone cross-referenced. There's at least 2 threads trying to confirm your unit. They won't find specifics, no, but they'll find enough to make noise. Carver paused. The video itself, Luke, I'm not going to tell you it's bad. The part where you walk out of the trees, the part where you talk to the teacher, and especially the part where Emma does the second presentation, it's not bad content. The kid's remarkable. I know. But you didn't consent to being filmed. No, and Emma didn't. A long pause. What do you want to do? Carver asked. Luke was quiet for a while. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen window. Atlas's ear moved at the sound and settled. I need to see it first, Luke said. I'll send the link. Don't send it to this phone. He gave Carver a secondary number not operational, just a second line he maintained for situations where he preferred not to have things on his primary device. Old habit. Got it, a pause. For what it's worth, and I know this isn't your priority, the way you handled it was solid. The way you talked to the teacher. Not a lot of guys would have kept that register. Getting loud wouldn't have helped Emma. I know. What I mean. Another pause. How are you actually doing? Not the situation. You, Luke looked at the dark window. I'm okay. Single parenting a kid with medical complexity while maintaining low profile with a prior service background. That's not a small load. She's not a load. That's not what I know what you meant. Luke rubbed his face. I'm okay, Dan. It's been a hard week. We're managing. All right. Carver's voice shifted into the practical mode. I'll send the link. You think about what you want to do. If you want it taken down, there are channels it'll take a few days, and it won't be total, but we can reduce the reach. If you decide to leave it, I'd recommend at least a statement of some kind through the school, just so the narrative has something accurate in it. I'll look at it tonight. Don't stay up too late looking at comments. I wasn't going to read the comments. Everyone reads the comments. Good night, Dan. Night. He looked at the video. It had been filmed from a distance, which meant the audio was partially degraded, the ambient sound of the clearing, the wind, the birds. Phone's microphone had been better than average, and most of the dialogue carried. Not all of it. Enough. The video was 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Began roughly at the moment Atlas barked the dog. Emerging from the trees was the first clear image, and it ended after Emma completed the second presentation, cutting off just before the sound of the school group beginning to stir. Luke watched it twice. The second time, he watched his daughter's face during the moment he placed the board back in her lap. The way she looked at it. The way she didn't look at Rachel Monroe. The video had been posted with a caption that was 3 sentences long and accurate. No tags, no hashtags, just the plain account of what it showed. The person who'd posted it had a small personal account, a few hundred followers, mostly local, the kind of account that belonged to a parent who used social media to share photos of their kids' soccer games and the occasional recipe. It had been shared 47,000 times as of 10:15 Friday night. Luke closed the phone. He sat in the quiet kitchen and thought about the specific problem of things that are true becoming public in ways you didn't choose, and about the difference between a story being known and a story being consumed, and about Emma's name being in comment threads on 47,000 shares by people who had never met her and had opinions about her life that they were expressing with the confidence of people who had watched 4 minutes and 17 seconds of a situation they had no other context for. He was not a person who handled loss of control gracefully. He was better at it than he'd been at 24, which was when he'd first understood that control was largely an illusion anyway, and the useful skill was not maintaining it, but knowing what to do when it was gone. But better at it didn't mean comfortable with it. He made coffee he didn't need and sat with it and thought. By 11:30, he had a rough shape of what he wanted to do. By midnight, he'd refined it enough to act on. He wrote 3 notes, one to himself, one a draft message he didn't send yet, one a list of calls to make in the morning, and then he went to bed. He slept poorly. This was not unusual. Saturday morning, Emma found out about the video before Luke had the chance to tell her. He'd been planning to tell her after breakfast. He'd made the coffee and was starting eggs when her phone, she had a basic model, primarily for the school's parent communication app, and the group chat with Jalen and 2 other kids buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, looked back at him, then looked at the phone again. "Someone sent me a link," she said. He set the spatula down. "I know about it." She looked at him. "Were you going to tell me?" "After breakfast, so yes." She looked at the phone. "Can I watch it?" He hesitated. Not because he wanted to keep it from her, she'd find it regardless. And finding it herself was worse than watching it with him present. He hesitated because he was already running calculations about what it would feel like for her to see herself on a screen in a moment she hadn't consented to being recorded. And the calculations were not coming up clean. "Yeah," he said. "Come here." He sat next to her and they watched it on her phone, the small screen between them. Atlas came and sat beside Emma's chair. The egg sat on the stove getting cold. When it ended, Emma was quiet for a moment. "That's my voice," she said. "That's your voice. I sound different than I think I sound. Everyone does." Another pause. She watched the still frame the video had frozen on Emma's face at the end of the second presentation, looking out at the group with an expression that was somewhere between determined and exhausted. 47,000 shares, Luke said, as of last night. Probably more now. Emma stared at the number. I don't know how many people that is. A lot. Did Ms. Monroe see it? I don't know. Did the school? Almost certainly. She set the phone face down on the table. I didn't know someone was filming. Neither did I. Is that a problem? Like, legally? He looked at his daughter, who was 10 years old, and asking about legal implications of being filmed without consent in a public space, and registered again the particular quality of her mind that had enabled her to correctly partition classified information in a 5th grade presentation. Technically, it's a public space, he said. Legally, it's complicated because you're a minor, and I'd have grounds to push back. But taking it down completely would be hard and slow, and it's already out. So it stays, probably most of it, she nodded slowly. She picked up the phone, looked at it, put it down. People are going to know who I am, she said, for a while. These things tend to cycle. What do I do? Nothing you don't want to do, he said. I'm going to put out a short statement through the school, just factual, no drama. That gives people something accurate to reference. Beyond that, we don't have to respond to any of it. She was quiet. Then the comments are probably, don't read the comments. You read them. I skimmed them. That's different. How is that different? Because I was looking for specific things, and I stopped when I found them. He held her gaze. Comment sections are where nuance goes to die. They don't know you. They know 4 minutes of a moment. Whatever they're saying, supportive or not, they're talking about a version of you that isn't actually you. Emma chewed on this. Some of them are probably saying nice things about you. Some of them are. Does that feel weird? He thought about it honestly. Yeah. Why? Because I didn't do anything that day that deserved attention. I showed up. I retrieved a board from the mud. I asked a question. He turned back to the eggs, which were a loss at this point. Emma did the hard part. She looked at the dead phone screen. The second presentation, she said. That part in the video. When I talk about the door frames and the braiding. A pause. I didn't know someone was watching. I know. If I'd known, I might have said it differently. I know that, too. He scraped the eggs into the pan's discard pile and started over. That's actually why it works the way it does. Because you weren't performing it. She sat with this. I don't want to be viral, she said. The word in her mouth sounded like she'd picked it up off the ground and wasn't sure she wanted to hold it. I know. Can I still be just normal school kid next week? He glanced at her. You can try. That's not reassuring. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Can't promise it won't be weird for a while. I can promise it'll be less weird eventually. She looked at Atlas. The dog looked back at her. Okay, she said. Make better eggs this time. The call from the school came at 9:40 Saturday morning, which meant Haynes was working on her weekend, which told Luke something about the velocity of the situation. I assume you know about the video, Haynes said. I do. We've received 40-some media inquiries since yesterday evening. Local news, 2 nationals, 1 international outlet. A pause. I've been declining comment and referring everything to the district's communications office. I wanted you to know before you saw anything in the news. I appreciate it, Mr. Calloway. I want to be direct. The school is managing the media side. But the situation has gotten larger than what we anticipated when we were planning the internal response. Policy change, the assembly, the formal disciplinary process, all of that was designed for a school community context. It wasn't designed for public consumption. No. What I'm asking is whether your preference is for us to continue with minimal public statement and let the story cycle, or whether you want a more active communications approach. Either is viable, but it affects how I respond to the press going forward. Luke was in his truck in the driveway, windows down, coffee in the cup holder. He could see Emma through the kitchen window at the table with Atlas. Saturday morning light, ordinary as anything. Minimal, he said. School's statement about the policy change is sufficient. I don't want Emma's name in any press statement. She's a minor, and she didn't consent to the video. Agreed. I won't use her name. For Rachel Monroe, same principle. Whatever the school chooses to say about the internal response, I'd rather it not become a media story about her specifically. She apologized. Publicly. In front of the people who mattered. Haynes was quiet for a moment. You're protecting her. I'm not. He picked up the coffee. I'm just not interested in what happens to her becoming the story. Because then the story isn't about what happened to Emma. It's about the teacher. And that's not what any of this should be about. That's a thoughtful distinction. Emma made it first, he said. I'm catching up. He heard something that might have been a brief exhale on Haynes's end. All right, minimal statement, no names. I'll work with the district's communications office. One other thing, Luke said. If any outlet tries to contact Emma directly through the school, through any school-connected channel, they won't get through me, Haynes said. She's a student in my school. It's not a difficult call. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. A pause. For what it's worth, the assembly. What Emma said. Several of my staff came to me afterward, not to debrief officially, just to say that they'd learned something. She stopped. I thought you should know. He sat with that. I'll let her know, he said. Call he hadn't expected came Sunday afternoon. He was on the trail with Atlas, the same one he'd run Friday evening, moving at a slower pace today, recovery pace, or what passed for it. His knee had been doing a specific thing for 2 months that he was monitoring without addressing, which was the approach he took with most of his physical complaints until they either resolved or became unavoidable. a strategy that his last unit medic had called uniquely stupid and which Luke considered functionally pragmatic. The number was one he'd flagged in his contacts as Greaves' field trip chaperone. He stopped walking. Atlas stopped beside him, looked up, waited. He answered, "Mr. Calloway, this is Janet Greaves. I was the chaperone at Silver Pine last Tuesday. I remember. Thank you for the statement you sent to the school. That's actually part of why I'm calling." She paused. "I want to be upfront about something. The video, I was the one who filmed it." He was very still. Atlas, reading the stillness, sat. "I debated it," Greaves said. "I want to be honest about that I didn't make the decision instantly. When Emma's father came out of the trees, I thought, someone should have a record of this. In case it came to something, in case the school needed, I don't know, evidence. I was thinking practically." Another pause. "I didn't anticipate that I'd post it and it would go where it went. That was a failure of judgment on my part. I'm sorry." Luke took a breath. "What made you post it?" "Tuesday evening, I was talking to my husband and I was frustrated and I thought people should see this, how this child handled herself. And I posted it without thinking far enough ahead about what posting it meant." A pause. "I've thought about calling you all week. I kept waiting for a better time and there isn't one." He thought about Emma at the kitchen table, saying, "I didn't know someone was watching." He thought about the specific exhaustion of having done something right in private and then finding it public, the way exposure changed things even when the thing exposed was good. "Mrs. Greaves," he said, "I'm not going to be angry with you on the phone. What you did had consequences we're still managing. Emma is 10, and her face is on screen she didn't consent to." He paused. "But I also know you were trying to do something that felt right in the moment. Those things can both be true. I know they can. It doesn't make my part of it better." "No, it doesn't." A silence. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. "Practically, to help manage it. If you have the ability to modify or delete the original post, that limits some of the downstream reach. It won't pull what's already been shared, but it removes the primary source for anyone looking for it going forward. I'll do that today. Thank you." Another pause. I want to say something about Emma. Not about the video." He waited. "I have a daughter in 2nd grade, Greaves said. "She's 8. And when Emma was speaking at that assembly on Thursday, I was there. I came for the parent session. I was thinking about my daughter, about what I'd want her to be able to do when she was Emma's age. When someone told her she was wrong about something she knew was true." A pause, and her voice had shifted into something less managed. The thing Emma said about her father not being her hero because of the seal stuff, that it was the door frames, the braiding. She stopped. "I've been thinking about that since Thursday, and I can't shake it." Luke looked at the trail ahead. The timber was deep and quiet and smelled like earth and cold water. "She figured that out herself," he said. "I didn't teach her that specifically." "I know. That's the thing." He let the trail breathe for a moment. "Delete the post," he said, "and tell your daughter about Emma sometime. In a few years when it's relevant." "I will," Greaves said. "Thank you for picking up." He ended the call and stood on the trail for a while. Atlas looked up at him with the quiet patience of a creature that had waited out longer silences than this in worse places. "Okay," Luke said. To himself or to the dog or to no one in particular. Kept walking. Monday arrived with the specific energy of a week that knew it had work to do. Rachel Monroe was at her classroom door at 7:55, which was 5 minutes before she was technically required to be there. She did this not to perform diligence, but because she'd discovered in the past week that the 10 minutes before students arrived were the only minutes of the day she could think clearly without also having to act on anything. She'd seen the video. Everyone had seen the video. She'd watched it 3 times on Friday night in her apartment, alone, with a glass of wine she'd poured and not drunk, and the primary sensation had not been shame. She'd moved through shame earlier in the week, but something more specific and harder to categorize. The experience of seeing herself from the outside, of watching her own behavior with the sound down on her own internal justifications. She'd looked certain. That was the thing. In the video, in the moments before Luke arrived, she'd looked completely certain. Not cruel, she wasn't a cruel person. She'd examined this carefully, and she believed it, but certain, in a way that had no room in it for the possibility that she was wrong. The certainty was the part she kept coming back to. She'd been so sure. Students started arriving at 8:03. The usual Monday morning energy weekend residue, backpacks hitting the floor, the ambient negotiation of who had done what interesting thing in the intervening 2 days. Emma came in at 8:11. Rachel was at the board. She kept writing. "Good morning, Emma," she said without turning. "Morning," Emma said. She rolled to her space, got out her binder. The morning proceeded. At 10:15, during the break between literacy and math, Emma was at her table and Rachel was at her desk reviewing the afternoon's lesson plan, and everyone else was either at the cubbies or the water fountain, and the room had a brief, hollow quality. Rachel looked up. Emma was looking at her. "I watched the video," Emma said. "Strange watching yourself." Rachel set down her pen. "Yes, I imagine it is. You watched it too, not a question." "Yes," Rachel said, a pause. "It's accurate," Emma said. "What it shows. In case you were wondering if it seemed different from what you remembered." Rachel held her gaze. "It's accurate." Emma looked back at her binder. "I just wanted to say that. In case it mattered." It mattered. Rachel didn't say this. She nodded and picked up her pen and went back to the lesson plan, and the rest of the class filtered back in, and the morning moved on. But something had shifted slightly in the way the room sat around the two of them. Nothing resolved. Nothing pretending to be. Just two people who had been in a difficult situation together, acknowledging that they were both still there. The school program came out of a conversation between Haynes and Luke that happened 2 weeks after the assembly. Haynes had called with what she described as a proposal, and she'd framed it carefully, which Luke recognized as her way of giving him a clean opportunity to decline. "We have an annual career and community program in the spring," she said. "We bring in people from different fields, first responders, medical professionals, veterans, tradespeople. It's a rotating schedule. I want to extend a formal invitation to you and Atlas to participate this year. As a presentation on K9 working partnerships, search and rescue operations and service." She paused. "Emma would introduce you, if she's willing, but that's entirely at her discretion. The invitation is to you regardless." Luke was quiet. "I know the timing is complicated," Haynes said. "The video is still circulating. I don't want this to feel like the school is capitalizing." "Doesn't feel that way," he said. "Let me ask Emma." Emma said yes before he'd finished the sentence. "Can I write the introduction myself?" she asked. "I'd expect nothing else," he said. Program was the second Thursday in April, which was still months away, but Emma started on the introduction almost immediately, not drafting it exactly, but collecting it. Notes on index cards. Things she wanted to say, facts she wanted to include, the specific shape of what she was trying to convey. She was working on it at the kitchen table one evening in November when Luke came in from a run and found her surrounded by index cards arranged in a pattern that appeared deliberate but was not immediately legible to anyone except her. "How's it going?" he asked. "It's complicated," she said, "because the obvious version is just here's my dad, here's his dog, here's what they did, and that's fine, but it's not what I actually want to say." "What do you actually want to say?" She looked at the cards. That the job and the person aren't the same thing, and that most of the time when people think they're talking about the job, they're actually talking about their idea of the job. She moved one card to the left. Ms. Monroe didn't know anything about what a Navy SEAL actually does. She just knew what she thought one was. And her idea of what one was told her, my dad couldn't also be the person who watches YouTube tutorials. Luke poured a glass of water. That's a complicated thing to say to an elementary school audience. "I know. I'm trying to figure out how to say it simply. It's still months away. I know. But if I figure it out now, I won't have to figure it out right before." He drank the water and looked at his daughter and the index cards spread across the table, and Atlas on his bed in the corner monitoring the situation with one ear up. "There's a thing we used to talk about in training," he said. "About the gap between what a job looks like from the outside and what it actually is. The outside version is always cleaner, simpler, more certain. The actual version has all the doubt and the mistakes and the things that didn't work." He paused. People who are really good at the job, they're not the ones who look like the outside version. They're the ones who've figured out how to work honestly inside the messy, actual version. Emma was quiet, looking at her cards. That's what I was trying to say, she said. About the door frames. I know. She picked up a pen and wrote something on a blank card. Set it in a new position. You got it wrong twice, she said. Threshold. The first time wasn't wrong. It was wrong, Dad. You remeasured. He looked at the ceiling. Twice, she said. It's not a structural failure. I know. It's actually my favorite thing about the bathroom threshold. She didn't look up from the cards. 'Cause it means you did it. And it was hard. And you did it anyway. And you fixed it. And now it works. He stood at the counter in his kitchen with his water glass. Outside, November had settled over the neighborhood bare trees, the particular gray of a Pacific Northwest evening that wasn't quite rain but wasn't quite not. The kitchen window had fogged slightly at the edges from the warmth inside. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She went back to the index cards. He started making dinner. Atlas moved from his bed to Emma's side and lay down beside her chair in the way he did when he decided she needed company, which was a decision he made independently and consistently and which had never once been wrong. Kitchen held them in its ordinary light, the scratch of pen on card, the sound of water running, the dog's slow breathing, and outside the November dark came down over the street and the bare oak at the corner, and the house with its 3 redone door frames, and none of it was remarkable, and all of it was exactly what it was supposed to be. The index cards slowly accumulated on the table. Emma was looking for the simple version of a complicated truth. She'd found it once already, in a clearing in October, in front of 22 classmates and a teacher who'd gotten it wrong, and a park coordinator who remembered a dog's nose in a flood, and a father who'd walked out of the trees at exactly the right moment, even though he'd meant it as a surprise. She'd find it again. She always did. The index card stayed on the table for 3 weeks, not because Emma wasn't working on the introduction, she was, in the particular way she worked on things that mattered, which was to think about them continuously while appearing to be doing other things entirely. She thought about it during physical therapy on Wednesdays, during the bus ride to school, during the long flat stretch of math lessons that her brain processed on a kind of autopilot that left the rest of her mind free to move around. The cards got added to, rearranged. 2 got thrown away. 1 got folded and unfolded so many times the crease went soft and she had to recopy it onto a fresh one. Luke didn't ask about the progress. He'd learned over years of living with Emma that asking about her process was the surest way to make her self-conscious about it, and self-consciousness was the enemy of the particular kind of thinking she did best. So he left the cards on the table and worked around them and waited. November became December. School had the low-grade frenetic energy of the weeks before winter break projects due, concerts to rehearse for, the specific social turbulence of 10 and 11-year-olds who were tired and overscheduled and not yet at the finish line. Emma navigated it with the matter-of-fact efficiency she brought to most things, getting through the work, maintaining her alliances, keeping her head down in the ways that cost her nothing, and her head up in the ways that mattered. The video had cycled, as Luke had said it would. By late November, it had largely stopped arriving in new places, though it still existed and would continue to exist in the permanent way that things on the internet exist, findable, persistent, immune to being fully unmade. Emma had looked at it twice more and then decided she was done looking at it, which was, Luke thought, a healthy relationship with the thing. Jalen had described the video's comments section to her in detail one afternoon on the bus home. Not because he was trying to upset her, but because he'd read them and felt she should know what was in there, which was his version of loyalty, the kind that prioritized information over comfort. Emma had listened, asked 2 clarifying questions, and then said she was glad she hadn't read them herself, and Jalen had agreed that was probably the right call, and they'd moved on to arguing about which of their teachers assigned the most pointless homework, which was a more productive use of the bus ride. Classroom had normalized around her, which was both a relief and, in some small way she wouldn't have admitted to anyone, a little strange. She'd expected the attention to last longer. It hadn't, mostly. Kids were efficient processors of social information. They updated quickly and moved on. By the third week of November, she was just Emma again, which was what she'd wanted. Almost entirely just Emma. Sophia still looked at her sometimes with an expression that had shifted from the field trip forward, more attentive, a little more careful, the way a person looks at someone they've decided to pay different attention to. This wasn't unwelcome. Sophia had started sitting closer to her at lunch. They'd found out they both had strong opinions about a book series their teacher had assigned, and had spent 2 lunches in vigorous disagreement about the ending of Book 3, which was, Emma had decided, a completely acceptable basis for a friendship. Rachel Monroe completed her first mandatory training module the last week of November. It was the Disability Inclusion 1, 6 hours spread across 2 sessions, conducted by Sandra Chu from the district's equity office. Rachel had expected it to feel punitive. It didn't entirely, which was its own kind of difficult. It would have been easier to sit through something she could dismiss as box checking. Instead, Chu ran the sessions as genuine conversations, and the content was specific enough that Rachel couldn't distance herself from it with abstractions. There was a segment on something Chu called assumption of incompetence, the tendency to underestimate the capability of people with visible disabilities to unconsciously frame their accounts of their own lives through a lens of charitable embellishment rather than accurate reporting. To hear something that didn't fit your model and decide the person must be compensating for something, filling in gaps, making themselves larger than they were. Rachel had sat with that for a long time. She'd thought about Emma's presentation, about her own internal process in the moments before she'd intervened, about the specific sequence of her reasoning. This is extraordinary. Extraordinary things are usually not true. She is 10 and disabled, and probably the chain had run fast and below the surface, and she hadn't examined it until now. She drove home after the second session and sat in her car in the parking lot of her building for 20 minutes, not doing anything, just processing. The second training was on due process in student interactions. The third was the fact-checking module. She would complete all 3 by mid-January, per the timeline the district had set. The monthly check-ins with the instructional coach had started in November. The coach was a man named Warren, 50-ish, former classroom teacher, the kind of person whose feedback arrived precisely calibrated to be impossible to deflect without looking like you were deflecting it. He observed one of Rachel's lessons in November, and debrief afterward had been thorough and uncomfortable and genuinely useful, which was a combination Rachel was getting used to. You're harder on yourself in the debrief than you need to be, Warren said in their November session. I'm trying to be accurate, she said. There's a difference between accuracy and penance. He looked at his notes. The lesson was good. Your facilitation of the group discussion was strong. You noticed when 2 of the quieter kids were trying to contribute, and you made space for them. That's real. He paused. The thing we're working on isn't your general competence. It's one specific pattern. Keep those things separate. She'd thought about this. That pattern affected a specific kid. Yes, she's in my classroom every day. Yes. And she's fine. She's more than fine. But she shouldn't have had to be. Rachel set down her pen. The thing that bothers me most isn't that I made a mistake. It's that I made it so confidently. I was so sure. Warren was quiet for a moment. That's actually the right thing to be bothered by. Because the mistake itself is recoverable. You can fix a mistake. What you can't fix as easily is the certainty that produced it. That has to be rebuilt from the inside. He closed his folder. The fact that you're bothered by it means you're doing that work. Rachel picked up her pen. Set it down again. She's going to do the spring program introduction, she said, for her father's presentation. I know. Haynes mentioned it. I want to hear it. Warren looked at her. You will. You'll be on the staff side of the room. I know. A pause. I just wanted to say that out loud to someone. That I want to hear it. He nodded. Okay, winter break came and went. January arrived gray and cold with the specific bleakness of a month that knows it's only the beginning of a long stretch and has stopped pretending otherwise. Emma got through it with the help of 3 library books, a new chapter in the ongoing low-grade war against her father about the 9:30 bedtime, and the discovery that Atlas had strong opinions about which side of the couch he preferred to occupy during cold weather, opinions that did not align with anyone else's preferences, but which he was prepared to defend through sheer immovability. The index cards were still on the table. In February, Emma picked them all up, sorted through them one final time, and threw most of them away. Then she sat down and wrote the introduction straight through, without stopping, on a single sheet of notebook paper. 13 minutes. She timed it accidentally. She happened to look at the clock when she started and again when she finished. She read it back, changed 4 words. Read it again. "Dad," she called. He appeared from the hallway. Atlas appeared from behind him, which was Atlas's standard operational configuration. "I finished it," she said. He came to the table and she handed him the sheet. He read it standing up, which he always did with things she gave him to read. He'd never sat down to read something she'd written, always stood, and she'd never asked why, but she thought it was probably because sitting down felt too formal, too much like evaluation, and standing was just reading it. He got to the end. He turned the page over, found it blank, turned it back. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it." He read it again. She watched him. "The part about Atlas's ears," he said. "What about it?" "It's accurate." "I know it's accurate. I just mean," he set the paper on the table. "I thought you'd focus more on the operational stuff. Told you what I was going to focus on," she said. "In November." "I know. I suppose I thought by the time you wrote it out, you'd include more of the action movie version." He looked at her. "I'm not," she said. "The operational stuff is in there, in the context section. But that's not the part I'm leading with." She took the paper back. "I'm leading with the ears." He stood at the kitchen table in February in the house with the 3 redone door frames, and he looked at his daughter, holding her 13-minute introduction, and he didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Atlas went and lay down under the table, which was where he went when conversations had concluded, and the humans were not going anywhere interesting. The second Thursday in April was overcast but dry, which for a Pacific Northwest spring was essentially perfect weather. The school gym had been rearranged since the community learning session in October. The bleachers were configured differently, the chairs on the floor set in a wider arc, a low platform placed at the front for the presenters. Program ran from 9 in the morning until noon with 4 presentations, a structural engineer who'd worked on bridges, a wildlife biologist who studied migratory birds in the Cascades, trauma nurse from the Regional Medical Center, and Luke Calloway with Atlas. Luke was 4th. He'd prepared a 20-minute presentation on working K9 partnerships, the mechanics of area search and scent tracking, and what operational search and rescue actually looked like on the ground, not the television version, not the movie version, but the muddy, slow, equipment-heavy, frequently inconclusive version that involved a lot of walking and radio traffic and weather conditions that didn't care about anyone's timeline. He'd kept the classified material out of it, not because he'd been asked to. Haynes had left that entirely to his discretion, but because the classified material wasn't the point. He'd brought Atlas's working vest, which the dog wore for the presentation and would remove. When the presentation ended, a transition Atlas had executed with visible relief every single time for 9 years. Emma had the introduction on an index card, 1 card, 13 sentences. She'd practiced it twice, once alone in her room, once out loud to Atlas, who had listened with the focused attention he gave to things that involved Emma's voice in a sustained way. She hadn't practiced it for Luke. She'd refused when he offered to listen, which he'd expected. He'd offered anyway, which she'd expected. They understood each other's patterns well enough to go through the motions without being surprised by them. The gym filled at 8:55. Full 5th grade, invited parents, staff. Haynes in the 2nd row on the staff side, with Warren beside her, both of them with the look of people who were attending something they'd helped build and were now trying to experience cleanly without the professional overlay. Rachel Monroe sat 3 seats from Warren. She'd come early. She'd gotten coffee from the teacher's lounge and carried it in and found her seat and sat down and put both hands around the cup and waited. She wasn't performing composure. She was just there, present, waiting to hear what was said and prepared to receive it whatever shape it arrived in. Luke and Atlas were in the corridor outside the gym when Emma found them at 8:58. She looked at Atlas first, which was standard. The dog had his vest on and his ears forward and his body in the composed working posture that was different from his at-home posture in ways that were hard to define but immediately visible. Then she looked at her father. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since November," she said. "Are you ready?" "I've been doing presentations since before you were born." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "Yeah, I'm ready." She nodded, pulled out the index card. Read it once, not because she needed to. She had it fully memorized, but because it was her version of the check he used to do before any deployment, the inventory of everything present and accounted for. Card back in her pocket. "Atlas," she said. The dog looked at her. "You're going to be great," she told him. He moved his ears once, which she chose to interpret as agreement. Structural engineer went first and was excellent. The wildlife biologist went second and brought photographs that made several of the younger kids gasp. The trauma nurse went third and spoke plainly about difficult things in a way that the room received better than anyone had anticipated. Then Haynes said, "Our final presenter today works in a field that most people know primarily from movies and television. Our fifth graders have a classmate who can tell you how accurate that picture is because she's spent 10 years learning the actual version. Emma Calloway will introduce our final presentation." Emma rolled to the front. The gym was quiet. She stopped at the low platform's edge, positioned herself to face the room, and looked out at a few hundred faces. Some she knew. Most she didn't. The staff row with its familiar arrangement of adults she'd been navigating all year. Rachel Monroe, 3 seats from the end, hand still around her coffee cup. She found Jalen in the 5th grade section. He gave her a small nod, the specific nod that meant "You're fine. Keep going." She looked at the room. She didn't take out the index card. "Last October," she said, "my teacher told me in front of my entire class that my father was probably not who I said he was." She didn't mean to be cruel. She just couldn't imagine him being real. Because what I was describing didn't match what she already knew or thought she knew. The gym was listening. "My dad is a Navy SEAL. He worked for 11 years with a Belgian Malinois named Atlas on search and rescue operations. Some of what they did is classified, and I've never been able to tell anyone. Some of it isn't, and I've been telling people my whole life, and sometimes they believe me, and sometimes they don't." She paused. Last October was one of the times someone didn't. She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be felt, short enough not to tip into something else. "Here's what I've figured out since then," she said. "People confuse the job with the person. They think if you know what someone does, you know who they are. You don't. The job is the outside. The person is everything underneath." She looked at the room. "My dad's job is impressive. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. What he does, what he trained for, what he and Atlas did together in flooding conditions in terrain that search teams had already swept twice, that's real and it matters." She reached into her pocket and didn't take out the card, just touched it, then let go. "But my dad is my hero because when I was in the hospital for 11 days, he slept in a chair that was too small for him and never mentioned his back once. Because he rebuilt 3 door frames in our house from YouTube tutorials and had to redo the bathroom threshold twice and fixed it at midnight so I wouldn't notice. Because he learned to braid hair and is still, after 2 years, not good at it. Because he makes pasta on Fridays because I decided it was a rule when I was 7 and he never argued with me about it." She paused. "Atlas is my hero because he found 2 people in a flood zone that everyone else had missed. And also because he steals socks. And because he knows, somehow, without being told, when I need him next to me and when I need him across the room. He's always right about it." A couple of the younger kids were smiling. Several adults were doing the thing people do when they're trying not to show that something has landed. "What happened last October was wrong," Emma said. "My teacher made a mistake and she knows it, and she's dealing with it. I'm not standing up here to relitigate that. I'm standing up here because the mistake made me think really hard about why I'd chosen my dad as my hero in the first place, and what I figured out is that I'd been saying it right all along." She turned slightly toward the corridor door. He's not my hero because of the job. He's my hero because of the person. The job is just context. She looked back at the room. The actual hero is the man who watches YouTube tutorials and makes pasta on Fridays. He also happens to be a Navy SEAL who worked with the most remarkable dog I've ever met. She paused. I think you should meet them. She nodded toward the door. Luke walked in with Atlas at his left knee. The room's response was not dramatic. It wasn't a standing ovation or a collective gasp. It was something quieter and more specific, a kind of recognition that moved through the gym the way a single sound moves through water, rippling outward from the center. Kids saw the dog first. Atlas in his working vest, ears forward, body composed, moving with Luke in the easy unison of two creatures who had logged enough miles together that the movement had become unconscious. Then they looked at Luke, a tall man in a plain navy jacket and dark pants, no uniform, nothing theatrical, who walked to the front of the gym and stopped beside his daughter and looked out at the room with the level, unhurried attention that Emma had been describing in various ways for the entire introduction. He looked at Emma. She looked at him. Good introduction, he said, quietly, but the microphone was close enough. It's accurate, she said. A small ripple of laughter through the room. Atlas sat. Luke began 22 minutes. He'd planned 20 and ran slightly long, which he acknowledged at the end with the brief self-awareness of a man who had timed many things operationally and was less precise about gymnasium presentations. He talked about how working dog partnerships actually functioned, the training methodology, the communication system, the way a handler learned to read a dog's body language with enough specificity to distinguish between a tracking alert, an area alert, and the dog simply being interested in a squirrel. He talked about scent work and what it actually meant for a dog's nose to be orders of magnitude more sensitive than a human's, and what that translated to in field conditions. He talked about Myers Creek. Not in detail, he kept it operational rather than personal, but he described the basic situation: flooding, elevated terrain, a search sector that had been cleared and recalculated, the decision to run Atlas through a section a second time based on a behavioral cue the dog had given that was small enough that most people would have missed it. What did Atlas do? A kid in the front row asked. He hadn't been directed to ask. He just asked. Luke looked at him. He paused, he said. Just for a second. On the trail. His nose went up and then he kept moving, which meant he'd caught something and the wind had shifted and he'd lost it. Any other dog you might have kept walking. With Atlas, that pause meant something. So you went back? The kid said. We ran the area on a different approach vector. It took about 40 minutes. He glanced at Atlas. He found them. How? He just kept working until he got there. That's what he does. Luke was quiet for a moment. He doesn't stop when it gets hard. He doesn't know how. Atlas, sitting beside Emma's chair at the edge of the platform, was watching Luke with his ears forward. Can we pet him? A different kid asked. After, if he gets to take his vest off. Vest on means he's working. Vest off means he's Atlas. The vest came off at the end of the presentation to a degree of collective anticipation that Atlas received with the dignity of a professional who had learned, over many years, that this was simply what happened at the end of public appearances and that it was manageable. Kids were good with him. Luke watched from the side as Atlas moved through the half-controlled chaos of 30 kids wanting to pet a Belgian Malinois simultaneously, and the dog held his patience with the specific calm that had taken 3 years of training to build, and which, in Luke's private assessment, Atlas had actually been born with, and the training had simply confirmed. Emma stayed beside Atlas, not managing the situation, just present, answering questions when kids directed them to her, redirecting the ones that were actually Luke's territory, watching her dog navigate a gymnasium full of children with the same focused calm she'd watched him navigate flood terrain in the photographs she'd found in news archives. Sophia appeared beside her at one point. He's actually not scary, she said. I told you. You told me. But knowing and seeing are different. Emma looked at her. Yeah, she said, they really are. The conversation with Rachel happened after the program, in the corridor outside the gym while the room was still emptying, not planned. Rachel came out the side door and Emma was in the corridor waiting for Luke, who was still inside answering questions from the wildlife biologist about search operations in mountainous terrain. They looked at each other. The introduction was very good, Rachel said. She wasn't performing ease. She just said it directly. The way you say something when you've decided honesty is the only mode that makes sense anymore. Thank you, Emma said. The part about the job and the person. Rachel paused. I've been thinking about that distinction since the assembly in October. You said it better today. Emma looked at her. I've been working on it since November. Shows. A pause. In the gym, a sound of chairs being rearranged, the program's end reshaping the space. Ms. Monroe, Emma said. Rachel waited. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. When I was doing the presentation in the clearing, before my dad showed up, Emma held her gaze. Did any part of you think even for a second that you might be wrong? Before you took the board? Rachel was quiet for a long moment. No, she said. That's the honest answer. I was certain. Emma nodded slowly. That's what I thought. I'm sorry for that, I know. Emma looked at the gym door. The training you've been doing. Warren told me not the details, but that it's been real, that you're doing the actual work. Rachel blinked. Warren told you that? Jalen's mom is friends with Warren's wife. It's a small school. Emma looked back at her. I'm not saying this to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it matters that you're doing the actual work and not just going through the motions. Because the policy change helps future kids, but you're the one who's in the classroom every day. You're what changes or doesn't. Rachel was very still. You're 10, she said. I know, that's... Rachel stopped. Tried again. That's a remarkably mature thing to say. My dad says maturity isn't about age. It's about how many hard things you've processed. Emma's mouth moved slightly. He's processed a lot of hard things. I've had some practice too. Rachel looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was thinning out around them, parents heading for the parking lot, kids drifting toward their classrooms. I want you to know something, Rachel said. The presentation you gave in October, the original one, in the clearing, before everything happened. It was the best one I received that year. Not because of the content, because of how you handled the information. The distinctions you made, what you included and what you left out and why. She paused. I should have told you that. I should have told you that at the beginning, before any of it went wrong. I want to tell you now. Emma looked at her. Thank you, she said. I worked hard on it, I know. I can see that now in a way I couldn't then. They stood in the corridor with the ordinary noise of the school moving around them, and it wasn't resolved. Neither of them would have claimed it was fully resolved, but it was something. It was two people on the other side of a difficult thing, looking at it clearly, neither of them pretending the difficulty hadn't existed. The gym door opened, and Luke came out with Atlas, the wildlife biologist, mid-sentence beside him. Luke registered the corridor scene, Emma, Rachel, the particular quality of the air between them with the rapid environmental red that had been his operational baseline for 11 years and which had never fully turned off. He didn't interrupt. He finished his sentence to the wildlife biologist, shook the man's hand, and waited. Rachel looked at him, Mr. Calloway, Ms. Monroe. Pause. She extended her hand. He shook it. Emma's introduction was remarkable, she said. I know, he said. She wouldn't let me hear it in advance. Smart, Rachel said. Yeah, he said. She usually is. They drove home in the early afternoon. The three of them, Luke, Emma, Atlas in the back in his designated spot, where the seat had been folded down to give him room, the working vest folded on the floor beside him. The overcast had cleared while they were inside, and the afternoon was doing that thing it sometimes did in April in the Pacific Northwest, where the light arrived at an angle that made everything look briefly like it was lit from inside. Emma had the index card in her pocket. She'd touched it once during the presentation, before she'd decided not to take it out. She held it now, riding, looking out the window. You didn't use it, Luke said. I knew it well enough. Then why carry it? She turned it over in her fingers. Because knowing you have the backup makes you less afraid of not needing it. He drove. The card turned in her hand. Dad. Yeah. Are you glad you came to the field trip? He thought about this. The real answer, not the easy one. I'm glad you had what you needed when you needed it, he said. Whether that was me specifically or just Someone who could confirm what was true. It needed to be you specifically. Maybe. It did, she said. Not because you're a seal. Because you're you. She looked out the window. Anyone can walk out of trees and show ID. You're the only one who wiped the mud off the corner first. He was quiet. Outside, the April light moved through the passing trees, the road bending north toward home. The bathroom threshold, he said. What about it? I'm going to tell you the actual number of times I redid it. She turned. It wasn't twice. It was twice and a half. The half doesn't fully count because it was a measurement adjustment, not a structural redo. She stared at him. Twice and a half. The half was minor. Twice and a half, Dad. The end result is functional. Twice. She turned back to the window and a half. You're going to put that in the next presentation, aren't you? Absolutely, she said. Atlas in the back shifted position and sighed with the comfortable resignation of a creature who had long ago accepted that the humans in his life were going to say inexplicable things to each other and that the best response was patience. They drove the last 10 minutes home in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have gotten through something together and have arrived at the part where they don't need to talk about it anymore. In May, Clearwater Elementary published its new presentation policy in the annual staff handbook. 3 paragraphs, plain language. The essential content was simple. If a teacher has concerns about factual claims in a student's submitted work, those concerns will be addressed privately with the student and their family before any public presentation. No student's account will be publicly challenged without prior private verification. Student dignity is not subject to academic audit in front of peers. It didn't have Emma's name on it. It didn't need to. Haynes had written it herself and reviewed it with the district, and it would go into the next training cycle for all incoming staff. Sandra Chu had asked to use it as a template for similar policy conversations at other schools in the district. Ellsworth had agreed. Rachel Monroe completed her 3rd training module in January and her monthly coaching sessions through the end of the school year. Warren's final report, filed in June, described her teaching practice as strong overall, with meaningful demonstrated growth in the specific areas identified for development. He noted that she had initiated several conversations with colleagues about student dignity and due process unprompted, which was outside the formal requirement and indicated internalized understanding rather than compliance performance. She applied to return for a 3rd year. She was approved. The summer came. Emma turned 11 in July. Luke made her the specific lemon cake she'd requested every birthday. Since she was 6, he'd gotten competent at it over the years, though he still slightly overbaked the edges, which Emma had decided was a feature rather than a defect because the edges were her favorite part. Atlas wore the birthday bandana without complaint, which was his annual concession to the occasion. Jalen came to the birthday and spent 45 minutes trying to teach Atlas a trick the dog had already known for 6 years and showing no sign of knowing because Atlas had decided this was the appropriate response and maintained it with professional consistency. Emma watched this from her chair with the particular satisfaction of someone watching a friend have a genuine experience. She had her introduction folded in the drawer with the district letter and her father's formal documents and the new index card she'd written last week, not for a presentation, just for herself, because she'd thought of a better way to say the things she'd been trying to say since November, and she didn't want to lose it. The job is what someone does. The person is who they are when the job is over, and the doorframe needs fixing, and no one is watching, and they do it anyway. She'd gotten it to 1 sentence, 13 words. She read it once before she put it in the drawer, and then she went back to the kitchen where the birthday cake had almost enough candles on it, and her father was attempting to light them in a wind that kept coming through the back door, that Atlas kept nosing open because he liked the May air, and the whole situation was loud and slightly chaotic and completely ordinary in every way that mattered. The light came through the kitchen window, at the angle it got this time of year. Atlas finally stayed out of the door. Luke got the candles lit on the 3rd try. Emma looked at the small flames holding steady in the kitchen air, and she did not close her eyes, and she did not make a wish, Because there are moments when you understand that what you have is not something to wish toward, but something to see clearly, to look at directly, without flinching, with the specific courage of a person who has learned the difference between the story people tell about you and the story that is actually true. She had learned that difference in a muddy clearing in October. She had been learning it in smaller ways her entire life. She leaned forward and blew out every flame in one breath. Never measure someone's truth by the limits of your own imagination. The most extraordinary people are often the ones you almost missed.